Welcome to the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Mike McIntyre. Good to have you with us. Leaders of the effort to abolish property taxes in Ohio say they won't stop until the issue is before voters. But will that happen this year? The Cuyahoga County prosecutor has called for the state auditor to investigate expenditures for a new jail, the latest salvo in his battle with the county executive. Truckers who blew off more than $5 million in tolls have been put on blast and sent to collections by the Ohio Turnpike Commission. And the federal government is having a tough time unloading the Cleveland Harbor West Pierhead Lighthouse. New asking price? Nothing. Joining me to discuss these stories and other news of the week, IdeaStream Public Media's criminal justice reporter Matt Richman and Akron-Canton reporter Anna Huntsman in studio with me. Good to see both of you guys.
Morning, Mike.
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. And happy Friday as well.
Happy Friday.
Exactly. In Columbus, a woman who at that price can finally afford a lighthouse. IdeaStream's State House News Bureau Chief Karen Kassler. Let's get ready to roundtable. Prosecutor Michael O'Malley has called for the state auditor's public integrity unit to investigate the county's funding process for a new billion-dollar jail project in Garfield Heights. And Matt, this is a spat that's been going on for some time with Michael O'Malley, the prosecutor, and Chris Ronayne, the county executive. I recall we talked on this show about a letter that O'Malley had sent saying, you're doing it wrong and you're breaking the law. So they didn't heed that letter, and now O'Malley is ramping it up?
Yeah, there's a state law that was passed in 2024 to sort of add a requirement. If you want to build a jail, you have to create a committee with, the clerk of courts, the sheriff, a couple judges, people who work kind of in the jail or in the courthouse, who have to approve the plans for the jail. And this was never done. And O'Malley brought this up because they haven't really started construction and they haven't kind of secured the large amount of money, the close to $1 billion it'll take to really build the thing. But they've started to do some basic site work. And he said, you shut it down. You can't do that until you get this committee formed and have them vote on the plan.
And they didn't then say, okay, let's get a committee and do it all the way that O'Malley says it should be done.
Initially, it was sort of a spat between the county executive and the prosecutor, kind of saying, he's just getting in the way of kind of county operations, and we're going to look at it and see what our options are. There were lawsuits threatened, and they had formed a committee that was supposed to meet this week, Wednesday, and that committee's meeting was canceled at the last minute, and that there were no comments on why that happened, but there's speculation there was a sort of a stray comment in the in county council's meeting where the council president mentioned that he expects that committee to vote in favor of the jail plan because judges on it had received a guarantee from the county to get $150 million to sort of upgrade the existing courthouse, and that was taken as sort of saying that they were bribed for their vote. That's a side issue, and then but it's not really clear why they should cancel that meeting.
So it seems like one of the big sticking points was what happens to the existing courthouse, because if you're going to move the whole jail and complex and all of that out to Garfield Heights, we still have this facility here that is not in good stead. So now what we're saying is, okay, we'll do the upgrades there too, and everybody will approve this. What O'Malley then has done is kick it up. He went to the state auditor, and what does he want from Keith Faber?
Well, kind of to review his findings, more or less. He just said they hired this company to be the designer and builder. It was $40 million thereabouts for kind of that preliminary work was bonded by the city, so borrowed by the county. And he said, were these steps that were taken? How were they taken? Were they an issue with state law? And it's not clear where that's going to lead.
In the meantime, the county council hasn't given some of the approvals that it needs to do, including borrowing the money. It's a $1 billion project. They've got to do some voting in order to make that happen. That's on hold until we figure this out?
Well, yes. And no, I mean, the schedule that their sort of bond specialist and the project manager are kind of working on said that if they get the vote on issuing the bonds to borrow the money and on there's a kind of a final maximum price that the builder has given to the county council also has to vote on. And if they do those votes by the 28th, so Tuesday, then the schedule that they have laid out to kind of make all that work together is still kind of in place. It's not clear now because there was a third piece where county council wanted to pass an ordinance that would restrict how the sales tax that's being used to pay off the borrowing for the jail, how that money is like spent kind of down to the details, or it's sort of a question of whether it should be spent on operations at the jail or just building, and county council wants it to be restricted to building and maintenance of the jail and a new courthouse. So that piece is now has now passed. And so, in theory, if they can kind of push this vote through on the 28th, but without that approval, this is getting very confusing, without that approval from that committee that had their meeting canceled on Wednesday, there's some doubt among council members that they should be issuing the bonds without that vote.
It is confusing, but it's good to have you here because you know what it is, and now I think I understand it. So thank you for cutting through that thicket. In the meantime, we've got an existing county jail, which is attached to that Justice Center that we talked about, that is not in great shape, that has been overcrowded in its history, and where there have been a number of deaths. There was an investigation and a statement that was made by the U.S. Marshals Service saying that it was not up to par. And now we have, just this week, another $50 million wrongful death suit that was filed in regards to someone who was incarcerated there and died. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, her name was Jennifer Wade, and she was, checked into the jail for sort of something that happened in a hospital. She was somebody who needed medical care, and that was known when she went into the jail. And based on the lawsuit, when she was in her cell, she was laying down, face down on the ground, and did not receive kind of care and attention from guards and others who walked past her cell more than once while she was on the ground.
All right, well, I know you'll continue to cover that issue as well as the jail writ large, and we'll continue to look at that as well. And moving on to another local story, an ordinance passed earlier this week requires buyers of properties bordering Canton to agree to annexation into the city in order to get water and sewer service from Canton. Townships worry that they could eventually be swallowed up. And it's interesting, Anna, because it's one of those things it's like a connect thing. If you are connected to Akron and you want to get to Canton, and you want to get its service, then you got to agree to be annexed. But then the next property that might be connected to that property might need to be annexed. And that's where township officials are saying, wait a minute, are we going to have a township after a certain number of years?
Exactly. That's the concern. And this has been going on for a couple months now since the ordinance was initially passed. But that's the concern because right now it really does only affect the properties that are right on the border, as you said. But Stark County is kind of interesting. I think there's 35 different municipalities, so they're a little bit different than some other counties. There's a lot of townships, and unlike maybe some other townships that you might be familiar with, they have their own identities. They have their own trustees. They have different school districts. There's a lot of rivalries. So there's a lot of kind of pockets of Stark County that have their own identity. And so township, folks who live in the township, people who represent the townships are really concerned that eventually they're going to be swallowed up into Canton because as you keep annexing, that is what could happen in their minds.
And you say it has different identity. There's rivalries. For example, Perry Township, it has this famous journalist that's from there. Her name is Anna Huntsman.
Two famous journalists, technically, Stephanie Haney as well.
Oh,
also
I
from
didn't know
Perry
she also was from. I knew she was somewhere near around there. I thought maybe she was your rival. No, she's your.
No, she's my colleague. Absolutely. Yeah, right. I'm from Perry Township. I've had the chance to talk to a lot of folks from Perry over the past few weeks. Everybody, regardless of whether you live near the border or not, is concerned about this because it does have its own kind of identity. And folks are saying, we picked this township for a reason. We decided not to live in Canton for whatever reason it is. We don't want to live in a city. We don't want to pay income tax. People are concerned about Canton's crime rate, economic decline. They're saying we chose to live in Perry. We love this school district. We love this community. So that's kind of the main concern there.
And what is Canton's justification for saying if you want water and sewer service? I think $15 15,000 or 15%, the number of people that are not in Canton that get that sewer
Yeah.
service is some percentage of what they have. What is their argument for saying you should be annexed into the city? It makes it easier for them somehow?
Well, they can collect more income tax if there's more folks living there. But the main thing they said is there's some odd borders. So if you actually look at a map of Stark County, you'll see there's Canton, and then there's kind of like around it is Plain Township. And then there's these little kind of islands of township inside the city limits or vice versa. And so they're saying, you know, if we're trying to pave a street and then it suddenly is in a township, we have to go around that. And wouldn't it just be great if we could just continue paving that street? So they're saying it will make services more efficient in the long run. And that it's just, it doesn't make sense for there to be, say, 3 different fire stations on a 4-mile stretch of road or whatever it is.
If you go back something like 70 years, this was the trick where Columbus was able to grow as big
Exactly.
as it did, because it said, okay, if you want water from us, we're going to annex you. And then Columbus became huge.
Yeah.
Is that the goal here? Is Canton trying to become gigantic?
Well, I will say Council Majority Leader John Marial and Canton Mayor Bill Scheer have both referenced Columbus as the way to do it. And look at how they're growing now. And look what they did and how this worked. I did talk to an urban planning professor at Ohio State to kind of break this down, what was going on with Columbus and how does that work as a strategy today. And he was saying, yes, it indeed helped Columbus quite a bit. It quadrupled in size. But at that time, the areas being annexed were greenfield or rural, not long-standing townships. So he said cities really need to be careful and be cautious with this kind of strategy nowadays. He recommended doing things like joint economic development districts or JEDs. Akron actually pioneered that, by the way. And this is that's exactly what it is. It's, you know, you can get our water, you can run your business, but we're going to benefit a little bit from that business, whatever the percentage is. So
But that already
yeah.
exists, though, between Canton and Perry. We've talked
There's
about
one,
that
yeah.
in regards to the idea of a possible data center going in there and people being opposed to that. So one does exist. This would be
Small.
argue for having a bigger one or more of them?
Yeah, just more of them. So if there's a property, you know, if there's an area where there's economic development happening and the city and township both want to benefit, say because the city is providing water, yes, just create more JEDs, because actually the one Canton Perry JED right now is just for that data center property. It's not for the entire township or anything like that. And I don't believe there are any JEDs currently with Canton and Plain Township. Plain Township is the other township that's really concerned about this. There are none. They have some sort of municipal agreement. I don't know what it's called, but they're in conversations with that right now, continuing to talk about it. But Canton doesn't seem to be backing down on this. Plain Township trustee Scott Hawes and other leaders are actually calling on the state to do something about it. And so they're talking with their legislator saying we need some sort of annexation reform to say that a public utility can't be used for this sort of thing. So you can't make water access, you know, on the line here when it comes to where you live, essentially.
All right, let's get back to Karen. I think we're ready there now. And Karen, we were talking about the property tax elimination, the effort to do that. I saw the press conference yesterday that was held by the people pushing that. And what they said essentially was, we've got a lot of signatures. We're going to keep gathering them, but we may have to just keep our powder dry and wait until 2027. What's the benefit of that? If they turn them in this year and didn't qualify, then they just kind of evaporate. And if they hold on to them, they can build on that till next year?
Well, in a way, what we are looking at here with this group is, first of all, they held this press conference in a house in Lake County where there was a complete replica of the Oval Office, including the Resolute desk. So it was an interesting visual.
It was really interesting.
And then this group announced that they have, according to what they say, 305,000 signatures. That doesn't mean 305,000 valid signatures. That just means 305,000 signatures. They say their goal was 620,000, which makes sense because you need a fair amount. I mean, the last 3 citizen-initiated constitutional amendments that got to the ballot did have about 700,000 submissions when they brought in their signatures. So they were trying to get to 620. They're not going to get to 620. They still think they might get to the limit, which is 413,487. But again, that's valid signatures. So that would mean that if they got that number, nobody's signature was ruled invalid. So the decision they've got to make now is, by mid-June, is to go ahead and keep the signatures they have and build on them and aim for next year, or to submit the signatures they have now and try to make the fall ballot. And so they're going to have to try to figure out which one they want to do.
But the trick is, if they turn them in now and they are ruled not enough, then they got to start all over again. And they're saying that if they keep the number of signatures they have now, they can just build on that.
Right. And the problem with that is the longer you hold on to signatures, the more likely it is that more will be ruled invalid because people die, people move, all of that. So it does make the process a little bit more difficult in terms of getting to that 413,487 number, even though you have longer time to do it.
Is that how many sheep you count to go to sleep at night? 413,000. What is it again? You know the number right off the top of your head.
413,487.
So we'll look at this possibly the next year. That means we're going to continue to have this debate until next year. And the opposition to eliminating property taxes is getting organized. We know that there are townships and park systems and police departments and fire departments that are against this, but we're now seeing, and elected officials as well, we're now seeing this unified opposition.
Yeah, this group of more than 65 unions representing first responders and local governments and libraries and all of these entities that are funded by property taxes have come together with a group called Ohioans to Protect Public Services. And they formed before this announcement came out because they really wanted to get the word out there to start the campaign. I mean, they're talking about the potential of eliminating 2/3 of their revenue through eliminating property taxes, and obviously that's a serious threat to local services in general. And when I spoke to Senator Jerry Serino, it's his district where this announcement was made, he's been very outspoken against this idea, and he says that, first of all, the people who want to abolish property taxes don't have an idea on how to replace that $21 billion that property taxes raise, but the property taxes are also in place because voters approved them. And so voters have said they want money for schools and law enforcement and fires and zoos and things like that. So that is really what voters have said they want. So to say that they don't want to pay property taxes is kind of, or that their property taxes will be abolished is a problem.
And standing behind the Resolute desk was John Plesnick, who is a Lake County commissioner. And he said, look, you had all this time to fix it, to take care of seniors. There he is, standing with his coat on and speaking. You had time to take care of these folks. You didn't. And so we've got to scrap it. You'll figure it out.
Yeah, and I think that's been the claim all along from this group, is that they try to go to state lawmakers and say, hey, we've got a problem. You've got seniors who are being property taxed out of their homes. You've got people who can't afford to pay their property taxes because the valuations have gone up so much. And lawmakers didn't listen. And they said this is why they went ahead and expanded their efforts, not just seniors, but to everybody in the state, potentially to abolish their property taxes. Now, again, they are well short of what they need to get on the ballot. They have until July 1st, but it just looks like, and I had said this all along, it's an all volunteer group. The groups that have made the ballot in the past usually have used paid signature gatherers because you need so many signatures from half of Ohio's counties in a timeline. And so this has been a tall order and continues to be.
All right. And how many times do you think we'll talk about this until November 2027? With a dozen?
All the time.
413,000. What's the rest of that number again? 413,000?
480 something, she said, I think.
Karen?
487. 413,487.
Got it. That's how many times we're probably going to talk about this until a year from November. Go ahead.
Just so you know, that's not a random number. That represents 10% of the overall vote in the last race for governor in 2022. So that is a standard number that the data center people, for instance, also have to gather to make the ballot.
Fair. All right. Cleveland City Council didn't get a say in approving a contract extension for ShotSpotter gunshot detection technology, claiming Mayor Justin Bibbs' administration found a loophole to sidestep council. Members aim to close that loophole. And Matt, let's first talk about what the loophole is.
So in city law, any contract for software used by the city, if it expires without an ordinance to either get a new contract or to extend that one, can be extended for a year on the idea that you don't want just kind of all of a sudden this thing that you've been relying on to go away. So it applies to all software used by the city.
But this isn't like Adobe Photoshop or Microsoft Word. This was something that was in the spotlight that you did some extensive stories on about the efficacy of ShotSpotter, whether it really helps to reduce crime. There were questions about the cost and the cost-benefit analysis, and council had talked about maybe we shouldn't use this company in ShotSpotter. Maybe there's better technology out there. All of that was the kind of thing you would think you'd hear in hearings about this, and yet what happened was the mayor's board of control, which is appointed by him, just quickly approved it, literally in a meeting that lasted minutes.
Yeah, and the last time we sort of heard about ShotSpotter was at a meeting last year, and when the contract that had expired was first signed, council added an amendment to that to say that they wanted Cleveland State University researchers to take a really close look at how ShotSpotter is working in Cleveland. So the last time we heard at council about ShotSpotter, this report was presented. And it wasn't for a new contract. Actually, at the time, Mayor Bibb's administration was interested in switching to different technology, which we can talk about in a minute. But that report, said that it does what it claims. It's good at when it hears a gunshot. It's good at identifying the gunshot and saying this is pretty much where it came from. But it said overall, its ability to sort of reduce crime and its effect, because it dramatically increases the number of calls that Cleveland police officers are supposed to respond to. Right. Anytime there's a gunshot, that's a priority one. That means you go and see what happened. And so, that they estimated that about 90% of gunshots in Cleveland were not being reported by callers. And so, to some extent, it's like their officers are now just running around the city all night. And if there's no caller, there's no witness, you just kind of show up to an empty street. Maybe you'll be able to find some gunshot casings on the ground. In a few cases, they would find someone who had been shot. But in almost all of those cases, it was accompanied by a 911 call. So there were a lot of questions about what is this really worth it? And at the time, it was kind of, the assumption was that they were moving to a different technology. So
to flock technology?
Yeah. So you left that meeting with the feeling that okay, sounds like they're done with the ShotSpotter, and now it's being renewed.
This is a debate, again, that you think you would have heard in council committee. What we got from the safety director, Wayne Drummond, was, hey, it's on me. I should have told you guys, but we were allowed to do this, and so we did, and I'm sorry. What we're hearing back from council is, hold on a minute, we've got a real break in trust here.
Yeah, and they want to change that law, and having covered council for many years now, most of these ordinances for contracts, when they come up, it'll be a 3-year contract, and it'll include, with the option to renew for a year or 2 years, in the ordinance. This was paid by Rescue Plan Act funding back in 2021, 2022. So that's part of the reason why there was a definite amount and a definite time period for accounting for those ARPA funds. This was a bit of a different situation than what you see with the most contracts.
And when you say the law, they want to amend the law. The law is that the Board of Control can approve contracts, like you mentioned, that are renewals of software at a certain money amount.
For a year, and anything that's above $50,000 goes to the Board of Control for approval. So it's all kinds of small stuff too.
And so they're now saying, hey, that should go to council.
Yeah, for software contracts.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about a whole lot more in this show, a lot of this week's news to discuss on the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable. But first, let me turn it over to Stephanie Haney in the newsroom for a look at what's on tap for next week's shows on the Sound of Ideas, Monday through Thursday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. on 89.7 WKSU. Stephanie?
Welcome back, Mike. We're glad to have you back. Here's what we have coming up next week on the Sound of Ideas. On Monday, it's our Law of the Land series, where we talk about legal issues that affect our everyday lives. And this time we're talking about labor practices and workers' rights, including unionization. This is in Northeast Ohio and on the national stage. On Tuesday, we're talking about a health issue, preeclampsia, which is associated with pregnancy. So we'll talk about treatments for that and other things that you just may not know about it already. On Wednesday, we're looking at Cleveland social groups, which are opportunities for people to come together if you're feeling a little bit lonely. We also have a conversation with the godmother of fashion, Fern Malice, who has been credited as creating New York Fashion Week. Fern Malice is being inducted into the Kent State University School of Fashion Hall of Fame, so we'll check in with Fern ahead of that. Finally, on Thursday, we are talking with the author of Bite by Bite, which is a book that looks at the intersection of culture and food. As always, this is all subject to change if there is breaking news, and we want to hear from you on what you would like us to talk about, so you can email us at soi@ideastream.org. Back to you in the studio, Mike.
All right, sounds like a busy week, Stephanie, and I'm a little disappointed because I got a chance to look at last week's show when I got back from vacation, and Drew Mazius did that little break while riding a bike through the newsroom. And I'm thinking, Stephanie, a unicycle or a pogo stick or something.
Yeah.
All right, well, next time. We've got lots of plans for that. In the meanwhile, I'm Mike McIntyre, the host of this show, and I'm with Anna Huntsman, who you just saw, and Matt Richmond from IdeaStream in Columbus. Our State House News Bureau Chief Karen Kassler is with us. And before we get back to the roundtable, remind you to take the IdeaStream News Quiz. You can find it on ideastream.org on the homepage there. You can test your recall of all the week's news. U.S. businesses and local businesses as well can now apply for refunds on tariffs imposed by the Trump administration after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the tariffs unconstitutional in February. So we had some stories about some local companies. One of them, Anna, Earthquaker Devices, that said, listen, we were paying through the nose. They're going to look for a refund on that.
Yeah, definitely. This is a company that has, manufactured pieces for artists all over the nation and the globe, and they really rely on materials from outside the U.S. So I know that they're going to be taking advantage of that for sure.
They were ruled unconstitutional. A 6-3 decision. The Supreme Court found that President Trump usurped Congress's tax-setting role in April when he set new import taxes on products from almost every other country, citing the U.S. trade deficit as a national emergency that warranted his invoking of a 1977 emergency powers law. So that's how it happened. The Supreme Court said, nope, you can't do that. In the meanwhile, you've got small businesses all over the country that can do it, but you can't ask for your money back if you were somebody who bought that Earthquaker device or bought anything and paid a higher price, because individual consumers can't get their money back from this. Overtime costs for the Cuyahoga County Sheriff are below budget for the first time in years after the county executive focused the spotlight on the sheriff's budget. The sheriff said to bring it down even more, he needs to hire more deputies. Give me 40 more guys, people, and we will be able to take care of this. The county executive says, no, maybe running the office better, a little better administration will do the trick. So, Matt, tell us, first of all, for the first time in years, it's below budget, the overtime spending.
Yeah, for the first quarter of the year, he was the sheriff's department, and this is particularly looking at just the deputies, which for the most part do not work in the jail. The corrections officers, those are the guys that, if somebody calls out, you got to get the jail fully staffed. So the overtime tends to be in the jail. But for deputies, they were able to get it down for 4,000 hours. And they're expecting, if that kind of trend continues, it'd be a $1.3 million decrease over the, full year.
What's interesting to me is we put the spotlight, and actually I think the county executive did, because he said, I want to take control of your budget, and your overtime is out of control. And then there's a lawsuit by the sheriff saying, nope, it's my budget. So we get all this white hot intensity, and we talk about it on this show, and the media is covering it. And then suddenly we found a way to get overtime down.
Yeah. There's I think that they acknowledged during budget, there was this was in the jail, but, one of the chief sort of deputies of Patel acknowledged that there are gaps in oversight, that there could be a better oversight of, kind of taking a close look at who's there, who's getting overtime, and whether they really need to be there. The overtime in the deputies portion of the sheriff's department is, according to Patel, really driven by medical transports. And that means that anytime anybody needs to go to the hospital, in the jail, a deputy brings them. And then at the hospital, deputy or deputies have to stay there for as long as is needed. And that also means that sitting at the Justice Center, it's sort of like a table in the lobby, is how it was described at county council. There's a group of deputies waiting for somebody to need to go to the hospital. And so that is not a great use of, deputies' time. And then it does lead to, because somebody goes to the hospital, you need to put somebody at that table in case somebody else needs to go.
Right.
And so, they have a problem in that in the sheriff's department. They are going way over the budget that the executive wants them to get to. And they say that they just kind of have no choice, that this is the way it works running this department. And the county executive is not convinced.
And Sheriff Harold Patel also said that they were able to rein it in at this point, that it's under budget, mainly because it's been cold out and crime rates weren't particularly high. But now that we're getting into summer, that could spike again. So his idea is I need more deputies. If I have more on staff that I'm paying salary to, I'll have fewer that I have to pay overtime to. The county executive is saying, no, come up with a better procedure for staffing these things, like you mentioned, that table or whatever the other management machinations might be. Where does it look like this might land? Does it look like council is considering, yeah, we should increase their manpower by a certain number?
It's really unclear at this point. They say, this proposal for the 40 additional deputies was actually something that was done between council staff and the sheriff's department. So at least, with the safety committee chair, Mike Gallagher, and the sheriff's department, that's where they see kind of the solution to it. I will say at this meeting, they spent pretty much the whole meeting saying the way to get overtime costs down is hiring more deputies. And then at the end, a council member said, what are your overtime costs for this year? And, Sheriff Patel almost sheepishly said, they're down. So,
not good timing for that argument.
So where it shakes out is unclear. And, it should, going back to the jail, it turns out, and this appeared to be news to Sheriff Patel based on the meeting, he was informed by a council member that state law says that to move his headquarters, which they would be moved if there's a jail in Garfield Heights, to move your headquarters outside of the county seat, you need sign off by the county sheriff, which is a little bit of leverage for Sheriff Patel now. It was in the meeting. It was clear he was not aware that he had to prove moving his headquarters to Garfield Heights.
The political tangle over this jail just continues to get the knot gets tighter for sure.
Didn't we already talk about this?
Yeah, but that was a different guy.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, about 250 to 300 women and children on a wait list for Laura's Home Women's Crisis Center in Cleveland every day. As the school year ends, service providers worry that family homelessness in Cleveland and in Akron and in Canton and all over the region, often hidden in unstable temporary living situations, will intensify. And Anna, let's talk about that. The City Mission, which is the nonprofit that runs the crisis center we just talked about, they say it's been at capacity for years.
Right, and that shows that the demand only continues to grow, because for 10 years their wait list has been between 250 to 300 people, and then they can house about 53, well right now they're housing 53 women and 66 children. So once those, you would think that once those folks are able to get on their feet and maybe find a stable living situation, that would open up a spot, and then the wait list would continue to go down, but that's not what's happening. It hasn't been happening for the last 10 years. And as you mentioned, this is not just a Cleveland issue. Homelessness is rising across Northeast Ohio, across the state, in some cases in rural areas where that wasn't an issue before. So this kind of demand is being seen everywhere.
And we're seeing all kinds of responses to that. In Cleveland, there was a new temporary shelter that was opened downtown, which is a great relief. But as we mentioned, a lot of times you think about homelessness when it's cold. You're like, oh, I wouldn't want to be somebody cold. They need to have shelter. But when you think about the summer, school being out, and all kinds of other issues, homelessness actually can be on the rise.
Yes, and as you mentioned, homelessness becomes, there are some aspects of it that aren't as visible as, say, someone you can clearly see is living in a tent, or someone who's in a shelter. Technically, couch surfing is considered homeless as well. So if you are in between, you're staying with a friend or you're staying with family, and then you kind of have to go to the next place where you haven't been able to find housing yet, that's homelessness as well. And so what they're saying is in the summer, that intensifies because kids are out of school. So perhaps that situation that they were able to find where they were crashing on someone's couch, maybe they're not going to be able to do that anymore because they're going to have kids there now as well. And that situation kind of falls through. So that's the problem that's kind of happening right now.
Yeah, you're only as secure as the person that's allowing you to stay there. And that's not really having a home.
I mean, no, it's not. And yeah, as you mentioned, that's going to be a continued problem. And, the seasonal shelters are not open now because it's past April. And so, yeah, you're going to continue to see that.
Okay. Parma students returned to school today following the tragic death of a Valley Forge High School classmate inside the school cafeteria. The student died by suicide. Matt, she was 18 years old. She died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in front of other students in the cafeteria. So horrible. What are the authorities saying now?
So far, they've said that that the student did not intend to hurt anyone else. So there was no wider threat to students or teachers at the school.
Which is interesting because when something like this happens, this is a tragedy for that family, for the friends, for all of that. And yet, often what happens, and you'll see it on social media, and there are, I think, some emails that were going around, petitions and other things, where there's rumors then that get started. Well, the gun was brought in and the person intended to do, a Columbine-style widespread harm. These kinds of things can really grow. There could be a kind of panic that sets in. Police are trying to say that wasn't the case here.
Yeah, and they've, it's so hard to say what was going through the students' mind at the time. But yeah, they've said that we found nothing like, after Columbine, there was all this evidence found of
Sure.
the planning and of the mental state of those students. And so far, they've said that our investigation doesn't kind of show any of that so far.
The students were off school Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Today's the first day back. They do have help and support there. There's mental health support and other measures that are being taken.
Yeah, there are counselors available, and sort of the question now then is, does this mean that there needs to be heightened security kind of all the time at the school?
Yeah, that would be the question, that even if there wasn't some plan for a broader event, how did a gun get into a school? And the question then becomes, does everything need to be metal detected when you go into a school like Valley Forge?
Yeah, and that's a really tough one, because it changes. It has an effect on the atmosphere at the school when you walk in there every day and you go through metal detectors and there's law enforcement officers there searching some bags. It's a big deal, I think, to move to take that step, and that's what they're grappling with right now. And then also the cost.
Well, yeah, right. I was going to say there's also a cost involved in that, and the Parma schools officials are saying the state needs to provide money for school districts to be able to provide that kind of security.
Yeah, and the state is not a fan of providing money to municipalities these days.
They're not a fan of providing money to municipalities. I like that. That's a good one. All right, let's move on to Cleveland Clinic's Akron Children's Hospital. They got a bonanza. They received a $50 million gift, the largest in its history, from philanthropist Tom Golisano. The main campus will be renamed in his honor. And usually we don't talk about gifts. We get emails all the time and press releases that say someone gave $1 million or $10 million. $50 million to an institution.
$50 million.
Pretty big.
To help kids who are having health issues. Yeah, it's a pretty big deal, obviously. This is Tom Golisano. He is the founder of Paychex, which is a human resources and payment software you might be familiar with. And there's this whole Golisano Children's Alliance that now Akron Children's gets to be part of, these other hospitals, and kind of work together with them. But the gift is unrestricted too. So that's a big win for the hospital, because they can use it pretty much on whatever they want. And so it's going to be $10 million annual installments, and they're going to try to expand their behavioral health services, kind of relocate some departments, and even expand some telehealth as well.
So, you said it comes in stages, though. It's like each
Yeah, it'll be like over 5 years, $10 million. I will say they are going to move their cancer center to the Kay Jewelers Pavilion, so they're going to have an entire floor dedicated to that. And of course, they're going to, think of these initiatives and finalize them in the coming months. But they're also going to do something with the Boys and Girls Club in Cleveland, a primary care center, and they're also going to do some expanding to Southeast Ohio as well. So, I mean, they serve kids obviously across the state, so I'm sure they're very excited about this.
Yeah, absolutely. The Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission has put more than 300 trucking companies with at least $5,000 each in unpaid tolls on blast. Combined, they owe $5.2 million. Matt, they didn't crash the gate going 98 saying, let them truckers roll. No, that's not how it works. There were no gates. This is the system where it reads your license plate and says, okay, pay up. These guys just didn't pay.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're kind of doing what they would do with anybody, is taking they have the photo of the license plate, they send the bill, they send it to collections. If it doesn't get paid, they can then go after you when you do your renewals. But a lot of these are LLCs, so you go after one LLC, they just become a different LLC.
Maybe that's what happened, because there's so many on the list, and they're pretty much all LLCs.
Yeah, and the Turnpike Commission, I saw the letter from the director in an email that they put out, their newsletter, and it said, we're getting serious about this. We were going to track these guys down and meaning these companies, and make them pay up. But I guess with this kind of system, this can happen. You don't have to stop at the gate. They don't have to say you can't go through. They bill you, and whether you pay or not, it really is up to you. They send it to collections. I just wonder how that's going to happen. Somebody going to come knocking at the door,
Right.
maybe with a pipe wrench in hand or something?
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of the trouble that the cities here have had with like absentee landlords. You know, they can't find them. Their buildings are falling apart, and they can't track the person who's actually responsible for it down. You know, it seems like the solution it would be like an Easy Pass, where you have a thing on your truck and it deducts the money. But
Right. And I'll tell you that this is interesting because decades ago, when we were covering these stories when I was back at the Plain Dealer, the Turnpike Commission's tolls were supposed to sunset. They had a certain time and the tolls were supposed to go away. Instead, they said, we want to build a third lane. And so we're gonna renew these tolls so that we can pay for this better turnpike system and more interchanges. And indeed, it is a more robust system. But the tolls have not only not sunset, in 2025 increased another 3.2% to $400.9 million for the turnpike. It's a moneymaker.
and then to get this upset over that $5 million seems a little surprising. Seems like it would be the cost of doing business.
Yeah,
But
$5 million.
to go after.
I know. I don't notice when $5 million leaves my budget. Do
No,
you?
me neither. No.
Yeah.
I have an LLC. Just kidding. Just a joke.
All right, well, let's talk about millions of dollars. That's what the players are going to be making who were just drafted by the Browns. They added to their offensive line last night, trading out of the 6th pick for more later picks and moving to number 9, where the team selected offensive lineman Spencer Fano of Utah. He's already being inked in at left tackle. He says his idol is Browns legend Joe Thomas, which is good. They've got a Hall of Famer that's
he knows Cleveland
still
a little bit, I guess.
and he knows how to block big defensive linemen as well. And later in the first round, the 24th pick, the Browns selected Texas A&M wide receiver Casey Concepcion, who told fans to get the popcorn ready. Now, I don't know how big of football fans you guys are, but even if you're not a football fan, people seem to be draft fans. There was a Cavs game last night, and yet people were still watching ESPN to see
Well,
who the next person drafted would
I mean,
be.
that's probably because the Cavs game didn't go so great.
Yeah, so that wasn't.
too.
In fact, I walked in today, and Kenny, our security guard,
Yeah.
which everybody knows Kenny. He says hello. He calls us family. And I walked in, and every day we have, which should be on the air, a Cavs little podcast where we talk about the game before. I walked in and I said to him, "We're not talking about it," and he said, "You got that right."
Oh,
and that's
well,
it.
sorry.
That's all we need to say
That's
about
all
the
we're
Cavs
gonna
game.
say? Okay.
But in regards to the Browns, it looks like what I love the most about draft night, Matt, is that everybody wins. Like,
Yeah.
you don't come out of it going, oh, and if you do, you don't know what you're talking about anyway. I don't know who Casey Concepcion is. I know he played for a team.
I've
I
heard
might
of
have seen one of their games, but everybody wins on draft night. They're the greatest picks. The teams will present them to us after the weekend draft, and everyone will be happy. We'll find out maybe next year or the year after whether it was any good.
Yeah, I was doing my reading. There is I guess Concepcion has a reputation as dropping passes a little more than is ideal.
Oh, you're supposed to catch them, too.
Yeah,
Not just get open.
but we'll worry about that in a few months.
Anyway, so that's sports. That's the extent of sports for us
All
this
right.
evening. And by the way, Karen, I don't think we're going to get her back. We've had all kinds of technical problems. I feel bad for you there, Karen, but we're going to soldier on and get the rest of this show done. The Trump administration is pushing to induct a president into the Pro Football Hall of Fame for the first time in history, and it's not him.
What?
Teddy Roosevelt served as the nation's 26th president, taking office after the assassination of Canton's William McKinley in 1901. He's credited with saving the game. I didn't know anything about this until I read it in the New York Times. It was an even more dangerous endeavor back then. It led to the legalization of the forward pass. He got everybody together.
I went down a rabbit hole about this.
You did. All right,
yesterday, Mike.
tell us.
I'm so excited to talk about it because it also includes John Heisman, Cleveland native, because he is credited with popularizing the forward pass back in the day. But anyway, yes, they met together with these colleges and universities, and this association later became the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA,
Right.
and pushed for these stronger regulations because 18 football players died in 1905 alone. It was a really dangerous game. I mean, it still is dangerous, but it was especially dangerous back then because it was kind of a free-for-all in some ways. And so, yes, Teddy Roosevelt was basically like, we need to make this more regulated or we're banning it. And they accepted the forward pass. That was one of the things that came out of that conversation. And yeah, he is credited with actually saving it on a national scale.
Did he require that all rushing plays be uphill, that you had to take the hill?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't think so.
But
But
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. But actually, they were debating if what I read was correct, and I think it was from the History Channel. They were debating between lengthening the field or allowing the forward pass, and they were like, we don't have room to lengthen the field, so we're going to do the forward pass instead.
Yeah, and that's where we get back to KC Concepcion, right? Yeah. Get your popcorn ready. There's a forward pass that's coming.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean he's in the Hall of Fame. The president's administration will be pushing for that, but anybody can be suggested or nominated. It's up to the Hall of Fame.
I didn't even realize. I wonder, I should request this data. I wonder how many random names get thrown in every year. But yeah, the Hall of Fame has not made any comment about whether or not this will happen, but they basically said, yeah, anyone can, nominate who you want to nominate. And the Trump administration is hoping it will coincide with the draft being in D.C. next year. So that's kind of where it came from. And this was kind of just said by the Secretary of the Interior, or I don't know, actually, wait, it was the, Secretary of the Interior
Doug
said
Burgum.
it at just kind of a reception thing and was kind of like, keep this on the down low, and then it was not kept on the down low.
Yeah, well, if we're talking about it in Cleveland, it was definitely not kept on the down low. All right, we're going to go back. Karen is with us by phone. Thank you, Karen, for hanging in there. I want to get back to another item that we skipped here when you weren't with us, and that's the Ohio Supreme Court's ruling on Wednesday that a company that parses out power to renters is actually a utility. And so I was thinking about this. If you live in an apartment building, and I think there are 5 of them in Columbus that are served by this one company that was the subject of this, they're essentially acting as a utility. They're the ones that are deciding who's turned on, who's turned off in terms of their power and collecting the bills. A little bit higher is what they're collecting, the rate, than others. And so the question is, are they just a separate company that's helping with that, or are they themselves a utility? And the Supreme Court pretty resoundingly said they're acting just like First Energy or any other utility.
Yeah, they're basically a middleman. They're buying electricity through wholesale prices and then selling it back to consumers. And so, yeah, they're acting as a middleman. And utility companies said, hey, this isn't fair. They're not subject to the same regulations that we are, and yet they're doing the same thing that we do in a sense. And so they should be regulated just like regular publicly held utilities are regulated. So, and the Supreme Court agreed with them. And in a couple of minutes, one of the sponsors of a bill that would actually put this into law is going to be talking about it. Democratic Representative Sean Brennan from Parma is one of the sponsors, along with Tex Fisher, a Republican from Akron. And this is an interesting decision because it really does potentially affect people who live in apartment buildings who are buying from, getting their utility, their electricity from sub-metering companies. It's got a lot of implications.
Let's talk about another issue in Columbus, and I'm doing this by memory. I don't have it in front of me now, but there are several legislators that are pushing for family leave to be codified. There's so many workers that don't have family leave in the state, and so if they needed to take time off to care for a loved one or for any circumstance, it isn't there. What's the push for getting family leave, and where does that stand?
Well, this is really interesting because this is also bipartisan legislation. 77% of Ohio workers, according to a group that studies this stuff, do not have access to paid leave. And so you've got Republican Senator Bill Blessing from the Cincinnati area and Democratic Senator Beth Whiston, who's from Columbus, saying that the state should come up with its own state-administered family and medical leave insurance program that workers and employers can contribute to. And so they've proposed this idea of workers and employers each kicking in 0.4% in terms of payroll deduction, and then that would be sent to the state. The state, through the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, would then administer this program. It would offer up to 14 weeks of state-funded paid leave over a 12-month period to help people, who have newborns, who are caring for elderly or sick family members, who have medical emergencies, all of these kinds of things, and allow those people who don't have medical leave right now to get access to it so they can keep their job.
Well, we'll definitely follow that one as well. One of the 7,000, or is it maybe 413,467 stories that you're working on?
413,487.
87. Darn it. I was 20 short. All right. Firefighters in Seven Hills are sleeping more soundly with the help of sleep medicine experts at university hospitals who consulted in a redesign of their sleep space. My advice, had they sought it, would be no firehouse chili after 8 p.m. That would help you sleep better. But what they actually did here, and it was actually cool, is the Parma Medical Center, UH's Parma Medical Center, their sleep experts came in, took a look at the space and said, are you kidding me? These guys are all sleeping, right next to each other. You hear this guy snoring and that one's moving around. And this is, by the way, if there's not an alarm. This is when you should be getting your REM sleep. And so what did they decide to do?
Well, they decided to not have it be in a former storage closet, first of all, because that's what it was. And as you mentioned, they were all sleeping in the same room, which is also kind of not great for privacy, especially when you've got, men and women sleeping in the same room,
Sure.
So they want to expand it and have more female firefighters, as you'd think. But anyway, yeah, so they redesigned it. Now it's basically these like 5 individual kind of like dorm spaces. So you get your kind of own bedroom. And the hope is that you get a really good night's sleep, which is important for everyone. But you'd think especially people who are out there putting their lives on the line for safety services.
Right. Often they're there for days at a time on their shift, and then they get several days off. But when you're there, part of your job is to get your rest.
It
so
literally is part of their job, and because sleep is so important for your health, for your mental health, it helps restore memories. Mental sharpness and concentration. And so, yeah, they literally do have to sleep on the job sometimes to make sure that they're ready to go for the next call.
Yeah, and you would, as you said, you need to have them ready. And by the way, they are ready in the middle of the night. I know there was like some sound machines and other things too. I would assume they're not the kind that would drown out an alarm, a fire alarm
Probably
inside
not.
a firehouse.
I'm sure the
that.
sleep experts made sure
I
of
think that would get you up.
Yeah.
All right. A prime piece of historic lakefront property is again for sale. This time the asking price is a steal. Nothing. The Federal General Services Administration thought it had the Cleveland West Pierhead Lighthouse, no longer needed by the Coast Guard, sold at auction in 2023, but the buyers never closed. Now it's being offered as a free fixer-upper, but only to government, nonprofit, or educational organizations. We talked about this a couple years ago when they first put it up for auction, but as Karen said, she'd like to own a lighthouse. It's pretty cool.
Right, but unfortunately, unless she is working with a nonprofit or a community development corporation or a university, she doesn't qualify. So you have to be one of these accepted institutions, and you'd have to use it for some sort of educational purpose.
Okay.
But there are living quarters, and it's a beautiful space.
So you're out of luck, Karen. The other
Yeah,
thing
sorry,
is
Karen.
you can only get there by boat or swimming.
That is also true. But if they don't get enough interest by the end of May, they will open it back up for auction. So maybe there is hope for Karen.
Okay,
in
so
all
Karen,
this.
get ready for the auction if none of the nonprofits or educational organizations take it. All right, and that wraps up our show today. Karen, thank you so much for hanging in there with us today. Appreciate it.
Live broadcasting is something.
That's how it goes. And I thank you too, Anna Huntsman and Matt Richmond. Thanks both of you for being with us today. Monday on The Sound of Ideas, we'll bring you another installment of our Law of the Land series looking at unions and why a new generation of workers may be looking at them as they begin their careers. If you miss any part of today's show, we'll air a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU, and you can catch the television version of this show tonight at 5 p.m. on PBS, WVIZ PBS. You can also catch us on YouTube or the podcast provider of your choice. I'm Mike McIntyre. Thank you so much for watching, and stay safe.